Hi friends, welcome to the NPTEL course on Leadership for India Inc. Practical Concepts and Constructs. We are in week 3 discussing leadership for sustainable growth. In this lecture, we will cover leadership in crisis situations or crisis leadership. What is crisis? Crisis is something which is completely unanticipated, beyond control, and one that comes with irresistible force. Examples of emergencies, crises are also considered force majeure conditions in certain circumstances. Force majeure is a contractual term usually. It refers to an extraordinary event or circumstance that is beyond the control of the parties to the contract. Similarly, in real life, crisis is something which is beyond the control of human beings. It is also beyond the control of organizations and entities. Crisis can be caused by acts of God, for example, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes. There could also be acts of humans, wars, terrorist actions, technical failures. COVID-19 global pandemic, which the world has experienced over the last several months, is a pandemic crisis of extraordinary proportions. It has caused untold human suffering, major economic loss, and future uncertainty. It forced governments to impose long lockdowns so that the chain of transmission could be cut. It is a crisis of disastrous proportions because the virus hasn't really gone even after several months. While several governments, including India, have been successful in reducing the impact of the pandemic through reduction in the chain of transmission and also through increase in the Medicare facilities, we also have to remember that the crisis is yet to go. Probably this represents one of the longest periods of a crisis. There have been several natural calamities over the years. Natural calamities are by contrast localized and hit the impacted regions with great ferocity. Some of these, such as cyclones and tornadoes, are seasonal occurrences but become extraordinary because of the force and severity in certain years. Earthquakes, floods, tsunamis, cyclones, typhoons, famines, wildfires, avalanches, blizzards, these are all natural calamities. Virtually every country is affected by natural disasters at some points of time or the other. And these natural calamities disrupt social and economic activities. Over a period of time, the society gets used to natural calamities and inbuilds a sense of overcoming the natural calamities through fortitude and combined effort. With industrialization, man-made disasters also have begun to appear. Industrial calamities occur because certain of the processes which need to be adopted with a high level of safety and environmental consciousness are not properly followed. These relate to both technological incompetence at one level and also behavioral incompetence at another level. Managerial and operational short-sightedness also contributes. Some of the examples of industrial accidents that could occur are fires and explosions, factory and building collapses, nuclear disasters, oil spills, chemical and gas leaks, chemical contaminations, construction accidents, electric short circuits, dam bursts, etc. Industrial disasters destroy valuable property, cause hazards to the workforce and neighboring communities. When an industrial accident occurs, several times the neighboring communities are badly affected. The gas leak that happened at the Eveready factory is a classic example of what industrial accident could cause in terms of pain and suffering for population and have the impact prolonged for years and even across generations. Apart from that, they also disrupt supply chains and the stability of globally networked organizations is threatened. As a result, some of the disasters also cause certain nations to lose out in terms of supply chain preference or supply chain security, and certain other nations come into the system because of the proneness of certain regions for disasters. COVID-19 is the latest and the worst in health emergencies. From times immemorial, the population was affected by various public health emergencies which caused scores of deaths and lots of economic disruptions. Some of the more recent ones that occurred during the last 100 years are Spanish flu 1918, HIV/AIDS which came in 1981 and is still ongoing, Asian flu which occurred in 1957-58, SARS 2002-04, swine flu 2019, Middle East respiratory syndrome 2012, and Ebola 2013-16. But topping all is the SARS-CoV-19, which struck the world in 2020. It is assumed that the origins of the SARS-CoV-19 started in November 2019 itself in China. Over the last several months, it rapidly engulfed the rest of the world, and it stands apart for the extreme rapidity with which it moved across the entire world. It forced months of social and economic lockdowns globally because the chain of transmission had to be cut. Probably for the first time, travel, both national and international, froze in its tracks globally. Let's look at the impact of industrial disasters. As I said, there are three types of crisis situations a man or an organization faces. One, the industrial disasters. The second, the natural disasters. And third, the pandemics. We are discussing these things because only in times of such acute crisis or acute distress that leadership is called upon to play a stellar role in taking the humanity out of these kinds of emergency situations. History has it that industrial disasters have had multiple adverse impacts on the economy and society. In some cases, as I said, in case of Bhopal gas tragedy, the economic effects had been really long-lasting and social scars were never healing. Usually, the economic impacts of industrial disasters are loss of investments on facilities, and the replacement costs on such facilities would be much higher, and insurance would not be coming if the failure or the accident is due to human negligence or management shortfalls. Loss of production, incomes, markets and profits, losses are immediate and until the plant can restart. And also there is no guarantee that the market that has been lost and occupied by another company would be recouped by the company. Disruptions to supply chain and also to other firms, loss of wages and jobs across the industrial value chain, and overall decline in gross domestic product and the real economy. Industrial disasters truly take the clock back by a few years for the impacted firms. Apart from loss of property and life, serious accidents cause loss of reputation for companies. At times, nations also lose out because of the restructuring of supply chains to other nations, as I mentioned. Then let's look at the impact of natural disasters. Natural disasters impact vulnerable areas, for example, seismic zones and flood hurricane-prone zones. But industrial areas also may be affected in case they are vulnerable, and at times even when they are in non-vulnerable areas, floods and hurricanes can threaten industrial locations. Fundamentally, they damage the farmland, habitats and industries. Recovery and replacement costs will be higher. Loss of farm and industrial production takes place. Food and consumption chains are disrupted. Markets, incomes and profits plummet. And there would be cascading effects of these losses across both rural and urban areas. Disruption of supply chain and similar impacts on other firms and consumption value chains, again causing loss of wages and jobs. As a result of the natural disasters, mostly there would be decline in gross agricultural output. Consequently, gross domestic output is impacted and real economy also goes down. Natural disasters have a wider impact than industrial disasters, covering a very wide spectrum of life and work in agricultural, industrial and social habitats. Natural disasters can be seasonal and repetitive too. To that extent and to that extent alone, natural disasters give us a warning sign that yes, this is the season of either fires, example being the Californian wildfires, or hurricanes and tornadoes which occur in the Midwest, or intense snowstorms that could occur in the east coast of the United States, or severe typhoons and floods which occur in the Bay of Bengal and similar such things. So the impacts of natural disasters could somewhat be prepared for and mitigated because of the seasonality and repetitive nature of the natural disaster. However, even here technology and leadership play a part because these things need to be forecast based on data analytics and satellite imagery and more accurate prediction mechanisms. And if they were to happen, leadership has to demonstrate its capability to take the people out of the sorrow and suffering and reconstruct the areas at the earliest. That's the leadership requirement there. What about pandemics? Unlike natural and industrial disasters, pandemics do not destroy or dislocate physical assets. but they mortally attack or significantly impair the most important resource of the world, the human resource. It is the worst damage that can happen. Infectious diseases particularly can spread very fast, debilitating communities and nations. New viruses and microbes and their mutations do not have immediate treatment options. As seen from the current and past experiences, lockdowns are necessary to stop the spread, and lockdowns take economies several quarters back depending upon the period that has to be used for lockdowns. Many becomes in this process become insolvent, tax revenues plummet, banks saddled with NPAs. International collaboration and trade suffers serious setback. Thanks to the measures taken by the Indian government, we are seeing a good deal of recovery. While there was concern whether the recovery would be U-type recovery or W-type recovery, we seem to be heading towards a V-shaped recovery. And the good news is that the banking and financial sector has shown certain resilience in this unprecedented pandemic-induced economic downturn. That said, we have to be also remembering that these viruses do not go away simply until the vaccine comes. Although we have very good results as of date between Pfizer and Moderna in terms of 94% or 95% efficacy, and other vaccines, notably AstraZeneca, Oxford University vaccine, and Johnson & Johnson's vaccine are moving forward abroad. And also in India, 5 vaccine manufacturers are trying out their vaccines in various phases of trials. We have to be conscious that it would be a Herculean task to vaccinate the entire population of the world. It may take several quarters. So building up of herd immunity, building up of barriers to the virus, and practicing of several precautionary measures would continue to dictate our social life and also the economic life going forward. So the pandemic is a long-term crisis that has struck the human population, and the leadership is required to take the society out of this pandemic impact. And it is very important that we need to think of the situation that has arisen because of the pandemic and learn the lessons also. There are several leadership lessons which arise from these disasters. So what are the leadership perspectives for natural disasters? Ironically, most habitats are built in vulnerable areas, on the river fronts, on the seashore, near the hills, or even in seismic zones. When natural disasters demonstrate the power and fury of nature, it is these habitats that are easily and immediately affected. So we need to do 2 things. One, we understand that climate warming by itself, which is caused by industrialization, has caused increase in the impact of natural disasters, in the occurrence of natural disasters themselves. So we have to reduce climate warming, and we have to increase sustainability. These are the topics, and we also discussed the leadership for handling those kinds of climate related issues in the previous lecture. Apart from that, to be able to cope with natural disasters, the perspectives for leaders are that we have to make habitats safe, identify vulnerable habitats, reinforce the vulnerable habitats. Second, we have to leverage technology. We have to support through devices as well as through analytics the mitigatory measures for natural disasters. We also have to have disaster response forces. They have to be developed and deployed. We also should have a particular percentage of GDP allocated for disaster funds. We need to create such funds and also grow the funds. It could be done at the company level, it could be done at the industry level, and also it could be done at the state government and central government level. And most importantly, we have demonstrated leadership, that there is on-ground leadership which can steer the society out of this natural disaster related crisis. And role modeling of such leadership is also very important. The propensity for natural disasters will reduce when the overexploitation of the planetary resources is stopped and global warming is reduced and resource sustainability is enhanced. What are the leadership essentials for natural disasters? We have considered a few points earlier, but when you look at each of these points, it is relating to a whole series of habitat planning and locational planning. Many habitats have historically evolved in geographically inhospitable areas, so we require a global directory of such vulnerable habitats. While the history cannot be redone, phase strengthening of the habitats is required. While we are thinking of smart cities to help the urban habitats, we also require smart technology to make vulnerable habitats less vulnerable. We also have to use technology so that we can have forewarning of the impending disasters and take appropriate communication, connectivity and rehabilitation measures. So we need also disaster proof equipment and vehicles, tough terrain vehicles, and also more of bulldozers and moving equipment so that the aftermath of disasters can be handled. Then we need disaster response forces, people who are trained in this particular domain of handling disasters, and they should be deployed permanently, not airlifted from central places. Every area which is prone to natural disaster should have a rapid deployment force which is available. We also should have financial sinews to be able to handle the natural disasters. Every time a disaster occurs, people contribute and a fund is built, which is great. But we also should have in our economic system at a microeconomic level as also at the macroeconomic level, disaster funds which are set apart for handling natural disasters. And most importantly, leadership role modeling. Leaders at all levels must make the reinforcement deployments feasible and perpetual. They should also demonstrate personal leadership when communities are hit by national disasters. So regardless of the reinforcement exercise that may be carried out, forecasting the natural disasters, equipping for them financially, materially and socially, and facing them comprehensively when they occur requires agile leadership and also empathetic leadership. Let us look at industrial disasters. Amongst all the types of crises which I have mentioned, industrial disasters are the crises which can be avoided. They tend to be entirely man-made. We need to take multiple preventive actions and multiple corrective actions to make our industries safe. We have to deploy technology either in terms of using safe materials and safe processes, or detecting unsafe acts, unsafe hazards, and then correcting them through technology. We also need strong environment, health and safety teams in organizations which provide the right behavioral training, because safety is not merely a matter of technology. It is also a matter of behavior primarily. Everybody should think that there is responsibility of safety ingrained in the person, and leaders have the responsibility that everyone who walks into the gates of a factory have to be sent back safely to their families. That is the leadership responsibility. Continuous improvements, because safety has no end point. Zero harm workplace should be the goal of every organization. Visibly felt leadership in favor of safety is also the goal of all leadership, to ensure that there are no industrial disasters. We have got certain ways and means to do that. There is considerable research which suggests that if one fatality were to occur, 300,000 unsafe acts would have occurred in the workplace. It is therefore important that as many unsafe acts and unsafe conditions are discovered by the people in the workplace, and for which we need a safety culture, safety monitoring culture, barrier building for safety. All those things are extremely important, and these could be done through systemic improvements. For environmental safety, we can have ISO 14001 certification, which is a very rigorous and structured methodology for having systems and procedures and mindset changes to have environmental safety ingrained in the organizations. Workmen safety health is done by OSHA's 18001. That certification can help us look at workplace health and safety measures in a completely different light. And finally, ISO 45001 represents the gold standard in safety journey. We must have Kaizen and EHS circles working continuously on reducing the level of hazard in the workplace. This five-pronged approach should be the bedrock of regular and intensive management for instilling the safety culture across the organization. It requires continuous self-management, and everybody from the frontline executive to the highest level, that is the CXO or the CSO, should be involved in instilling a safety culture in the organization. And when we say safety culture, it is not just workplace at factory, it also covers workplace in the offices. So what are the leadership essentials for industrial disasters? We have to make our industries safe. There must be continuous vigil on relatively unsafe operations, and particularly during the relatively unsafe times. Most of the accidents occur during the night times or during the early morning hours. And ironically, although production is the same in terms of the planning in all the three shifts, we have less supervision in the night shifts and lesser supervision in the early morning hours. It is therefore necessary that we have to have a uniform level of supervision, a uniform level of alertness in the shop floor. That is very important. And all hazardous activities must be flagged and substituted by non-hazardous operations. Technology must be deployed to minimize foolproofing of every moving part in an industrial system, and substituting toxic chemicals by non-toxic chemicals, use of sensors and robots could be helpful in reducing the risks of unsafe actions, particularly in chemical plants. Earlier, it was all expectation that if you did the temperature monitoring, if you did the addition of chemicals as per a particular titration, there would not be accidents. But at times there could be human error, and at times there could be the quality issue with reference to the chemical, which could cause a snowballing impact on the reactor which cannot be seen. Having sensors in the reactors goes a long way in detecting these kinds of adverse developments, and also switch off the entire industrial line system. So these kinds of technologies are now available, and we should be putting those ideas into actual practice. And here the leadership plays a part, because these all are investments which require capital expenditure. And leaders must be proactive and willing to commit such investments so that the workplace is made safety. Environment, health and safety teams must be organized. Just as you require finance to make sure that every physical activity is appropriately financially translated, we also require EHS teams to ensure that every operation is performed with the utmost safety, health and environmental concern. So EHS should be an organizational imperative in every organization, and also where the organization has many sites, there should be a corporate EHS team which will ensure that the safety culture is permeated across the organization and across the sites in a uniform manner. It also should undertake safety audits, and leader for the company should be actively involved in ensuring that the safety is seen as a key cultural anchor of the organization. Continuous improvements, as with quality, there must be continuous improvements in the EHS systems as well. And leaders should demonstrate safety. And how do you do that? Perhaps you open every meeting with a safety moment. The moment a safety incident occurs, you make it a point to talk about it, not with a critical view, but from a learning point of view, and propagate the safety culture whenever you walk on the shop floor. Be a safety vigilant walking across the road in the sites, and use every site visit to propagate from the highest level to the lowest level the importance of safety culture. That is role modeling. It is called felt leadership. People can see the leader's concern for workmen's safety. That is very important. It is a kind of combination of good behavior as well as good technology, and getting the mindsets right is the very important task of leadership as far as industrial disasters are concerned, because these are preventable. These can be planned into design and executed appropriately. Then of course the leadership perspectives for pandemics. As I said, pandemics cannot be predicted. They have deep catastrophic and debilitative effects and directly attack the human life. So if human life is at stake, social and economic life will also be at stake, and there could be highly impacted prolonged recessionary episode. So what could we do in such situations such as this? Governments, public and healthcare specialists can of course collaborate and come up with solutions. We need immediate detection and diagnosis. Earlier it used to take 3 days to get a test result with reference to the COVID-19 incidents. Today things are faster. We are also getting newer paper-based and other tests which can provide significant early detection support. And also we are getting most modern technologies such as lab on chip and CT scan based tests which can help in immediate detection and diagnosis. We also need to have quick containment and treatment, for which physical and digital contact tracing, innovations for advanced detection through wearables, SpO2 measurement, pulse oximeters on hand, these are very helpful. And building of healthcare capacity, for the first time the governments and the society have recognized the importance of healthcare investments and building up of healthcare infrastructures. We used to have very few ICUs, very few hospital beds which are dedicated for prolonged treatment and recovery. COVID-19 has focused our attention on building up of institutional capability in this aspect. Personal protective equipment, various types of sanitizers, face masks, they were not existent as a regular line of production. The country has risen to the occasion and started producing those things in big numbers. But these are all new learnings that have come from the COVID-19 pandemic. And most importantly, the pharmaceutical industry has risen to the occasion, trying to fast forward the vaccine development. Vaccine development, which used to take 10 years, is getting fast tracked to get done in 1 year. Novel drugs are being developed and also drug cocktails are being used. Some of the drugs which are existing are being repurposed to be able to handle some of the after effects or the pre-effects of COVID. And leadership. Leaders are demonstrating from the front in economic and social change, and personal leadership setting is also happening. So any health emergency, even if it is seemingly geographical or national, has the grave potential to spin out of control as a global pandemic. Given the extent of globalization and international travel, that is a must in today's world. So no pandemic should be ignored. Even if it happens in Africa, India should be alert. Even if it happens in the developed world, the developing world should be alert, and vice versa. So what are the leadership essentials for pandemics? We should have a guiding principle. There should be an unwavering approach of health and people first. Leaders at governmental, non-governmental, industrial, particularly pharmaceutical and multilateral body levels need to be globally collaborative. There should be openness in acknowledging and timely sharing information with World Health Organization. That's critical. Ability to diagnose precisely and rapidly is the next fundamental step. Every virus or microbe is unique. So understanding the pathology of disease is the most important step. Understanding how different drugs and vaccines work need collaboration between doctors and scientists. As far as the capacity is concerned, hospital infrastructure, bed infrastructure, and infection-proof corridors and operation theaters or isolation theaters, they must be stepped up. COVID cannot be allowed to stop all the other kinds of healthcare requirements, be it for cancer or cardiac or stroke requirements. We should have enough separations, enough safeguards so that the normal healthcare routines are also taken care of. Dedicated hospitals therefore must be set up to handle these kinds of unexpected, unanticipated and highly infectious diseases. That is very important. Drug and vaccine development should be seen as a social service than as a commercial endeavor. The government should chip in with support to pharmaceutical companies which are establishing the vaccine development programs, and also the companies themselves should be willing to see them as a no-cost venture or no-profit venture. The more the number of drugs and vaccines available, the greater would be the security to society. And leadership role models comprise not only governmental leaders but also industrial leaders. We must make healthcare a topmost priority, with investments as a percentage of GDP being appropriate and adequate. Pharmaceutical leaders especially must keep devoting high investments on their own R&D and support university R&D. For example, AstraZeneca vaccine has come out of research from the University of Oxford. Similarly, several other developments are coming through startup firms. These need to be supported both by private equity and venture capital investments, as also governmental grants and supports. To the best extent possible, we should prevent pandemics. But when pandemics cannot be prevented, we should be prepared to handle them and building up of capacity in anticipation without commercial parameters dictating our level of response. That is extremely important. So let's spend some time on COVID-19 and how the world has responded to it and what does it imply to us in terms of leadership. Fundamentally, the biggest and the most unexpected pandemic non-linearity is through COVID. There has been an unprecedented human tally, economic misery and uncertainty globally. There is no doubt about this. But there are also many unanswered questions arise from how nations addressed the COVID crisis. Why did it take so long for the first affected nations and WHO, that is the World Health Organization, to start serious knowledge dissemination? Why did it take so long for the other nations to understand and become aware of the risks? Why have not nations built up healthcare capacity in the vital 2 months they had at hand? Why are multinational institutions, multilateral institutions especially, who seem to be lacking in impact? These are the questions, and the learnings from these questions would help us not only control COVID in a much better fashion, but also address any unexpected future pandemics with much greater resoluteness and with much greater resilience. So leadership comes about when you are able to diagnose a problem which is in the making and address it with a prompt solution. And that is the biggest lesson of leadership which has come from COVID-19. Does leadership have many shades of understanding on developing responses when faced with unprecedented crisis? This is a philosophical question. Are we allowing our optimistic tendencies or our biases to handle the COVID-19 pandemic in a different way compared to the way it should be addressed? Fortunately, India took a very strong approach to COVID-19, and the entire governmental machinery moved to ensure that there is great awareness of the COVID-19 pandemic, with the economic and social lockdown that has been announced for a month or month and a half, that has brought the issue of COVID to the entire population. Of course, there has been a great economic cost, but with the kind of stimulus which is being provided, the country and the growth response of the country would be sure to assert itself and come out of the crisis sooner than later. But it is important to learn the leadership lessons from these kinds of pandemics and our own response mechanisms for them. It is instructive that human ingenuity and resilience began finding solutions even for COVID-19. Although we were stunned and shocked when this COVID-19 pandemic came, and the way it attaches itself to the lungs or various other organizations was absolutely shocking and unprecedented. Pharmaceutical companies have begun working out various methodologies to handle this. Doctors have collaborated with pharmaceutical specialists and also with other research institutions to alter their healthcare protocols to be able to appropriately respond. So scores of drugs are under repurposing trials usage, including steroids, antivirals, remdesivir, lopinavir, ritonavir, nelfinavir, favipiravir, etc. have been tried out with varying levels of success in reducing the viral load. And of this, Gilead's remdesivir has secured US FDA's emergency approval. Notwithstanding WHO's questioning stance on remdesivir, it has also proven itself to be a drug of choice in reducing the viral load. Similarly, Fujifilm's favipiravir, which was used for influenza of one type, and that was successful in Japan and China for that strain, and it is also being used in India, and Indian pharmaceutical industry has risen to the occasion by manufacturing that. Monoclonal antibodies such as tocilizumab, baricitinib, itolizumab, etc., they have been able to control the cytokine storms which arise when COVID affects the body. There are several molecules under use for collateral purposes: hydroxychloroquine, azithromycin antibiotic, ivermectin, a veterinary drug, has been repurposed to be effective in COVID situation. The benefits of BCG vaccines are under being evaluation. Polyclonal antibodies are under development for antibody development. Regeneron's antibody is a classic example of straightaway building antibody levels in the human being so that they are able to handle the COVID virus much better. Over 100 new vaccines are under development, and as I mentioned, at least 5 vaccines from the developed world and 5 vaccines from India are under various stages of advanced trials. Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are likely to be the most early available vaccines. As against 5 to 7 years taken to develop a new vaccine, the race is on to develop a new COVID-19 vaccine within 12 months. And all through these lockdown periods, pharmaceutical industry has been operating without cessation of activities, given that drugs are the most important and critical products in this kind of pandemic situation. So all medicines, even after approval by regulators, need to be taken under strict medical supervision because this is a totally strange kind of disease affliction. Similarly, human ingenuity and resilience found solutions in various other areas also. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi said to the nation, India never had a big infrastructure for manufacturing of personal protective equipment. Today, India is one of the largest manufacturers and even exporter of personal protective equipment. Masks as well as ventilators are being produced in huge numbers. New rapid testing methodologies from the Tata Group, for example, these have been developed. Various innovations for affordable portable ventilators have been made by startups as well as established companies. Antiviral properties are being imparted for textile and plastic materials for masks and PPEs. 3D printed face shields have been developed. Sanitizers are being innovatively produced, and digital apps for COVID care and lockdown management have come about very fast. There also have been non-linear, dramatic responses from the governments and others. The developed world has announced a huge stimuli, printing of helicopter money, as they say in the economic terms. But India has chosen a path of very creative Atmanirbhar stimuli, that is enabling the industry to discover its own resilience and increase its own production and consumption capability. There have been contributions from philanthropic foundations, individual contributions, corporate contributions. There have been calls for review of supply chains and the excessive dependence on one or two countries such as China, and social messaging by media houses and celebrities. India has also recognized that while India is the pharmaceutical capital of the world, India is also dependent on China for several key APIs and intermediates. So there is a huge effort on the part of the industry as well as the government to set up new bulk drug parks and also new biotechnology facilities so that India can be much more self-sufficient and self-reliant in the pharmaceutical space. And the response from the government of India and public has been phenomenal. It demonstrates leadership at the grassroots levels. Despite the lockdown, essential activities were maintained. No household could say that the essential products such as milk or vegetables were stopped. Without a day's interruption, the essential activity cycle was maintained throughout the country. Various other industrial sectors restarted based on government guidelines, while the pharmaceutical industry continued to be operation without any stoppage. The huge population base of 1.3 billion acted as one person by and large to comply with new social requirements. Doctors, nurses, healthcare professionals, sanitary workers, law and order enforcement personnel, and essential activity personnel, sanitation personnel worked tirelessly and in the face of serious threats from the virus to ensure that the larger population is taken care of. Rural sector and farming community, which was not impacted by COVID, at least in the initial months, rose up to the occasion and ensured bumper crop production. New patterns of life and work, social distancing, protective masks, sanitization, work from home, online education, home deliveries, low density transportation, work from anywhere also. These things have come into the system, and the whole industrial and economic system readjusted itself to the new reality. The importance of national and state governments in recognizing pandemic emergency and guiding disaster response has also been very widely understood. This is the situation. So how was this possible? Because of leadership. Leadership which expressed in time and in the right manner, and the percolation of the leadership thought in the hierarchy and also horizontally across various agencies. So we still have some questions and directions which arise at a global level. What is the capability of the leadership system in the overall across nations, and the openness to understand unanticipated developments? What is the criticality of mindsets and behavior patterns in handling the crisis? Putting to test management jargon which are very happy to use in leadership and managerial studies. For example, anticipation, agility, planning, execution, rewiring. We use these words very liberally in the management field. How ready are we to test this management jargon through actual execution when faced with crisis of this nature? And there also are certain concepts which are maligned in the name of efficiency. For example, safety stock is a no-no. Industrial inventory management. Pipeline inventory is a hated word. Inventory costs are best avoided. Kirana stores were considered that not. It was also considered that typically indigenous entities such as Kirana stores would no longer be relevant in a future retail situation. But all of these maligned concepts are overturned in the wake of COVID-19. Similarly, there is a lot of recognition and respect for investing beyond the immediate need. But for the exploratory drugs, repurposed drugs, telecommunication connectivity, hyperlocal services, capacity building that has taken place, we would not have been in a position to cope with the aftermath of COVID-19. Therefore, we must also ensure that there is an appropriate and meaningful redundancy in the systems so that we are able to handle disasters, pandemics, and other emergency situations. So how do you grasp this impact of unanticipated situations? Can there be a playbook? And the biggest leadership challenge is to anticipate situations. And even a bigger challenge for leaders is to grasp the essentials of an unanticipated situation when it arises or even before it arises, and come up with quick-seller responses that are effective. I propose here a 3-step plan. When an unanticipated situation arises, the first human response would be shock, surprise, or denial. This causes crucial loss of time. The right response would be to openly confront the new development and undertake a 360-degree study. A 360-degree study helps the leader grasp the intricacies of the problem very quickly and holistically and come up with agile solutions. However, if you tend to have a closed approach to new problems, hoping that the problem will solve itself, then it will plunge the stakeholders and the economies into deep crisis. How the industry responded through work from home is a telling lesson as to how an industrial situation can be revived, provided we have also invested in an appropriate telecom gear and telecommunication connectivity. So to be able to meet these requirements, we have to move always one step of the impending danger, and that's where the leadership proactiveness, leadership's anticipatory skills, and leadership's agility come into play. For that, we need open mindsets and we need behaviors. The mindsets and behaviors are not merely of the leader, but also of the entire team which supports the leader. We should have, when we say open mindsets, the following 4. 1. A spirit of inquiry and curiosity. Everybody should be observant, should be curious about things, not necessarily about the disasters, about the pandemics. That should be a mindset characteristic. There should be a habit of reflection and introspection. There should be eagerness to absorb new developments, and one should be unwilling to typecast oneself in any mold, either as a kind of extreme optimist or extreme pessimist. One should be, on the other hand, a realist, willing to understand what's happening and then reflect and introspective on it. And what is open behavior? Being open in feedback and having openness to receiving feedback. Transparency and authenticity in expression. Alignment of thought, expression, and action, and commitment to credibility. These translate our open mindset and decision-making process into open behavior. When a leader has got an open mindset, he gets the best possible solution to a problem which is defined in a complete holistic way. When he also has open behavior, he serves as a role model who inspires confidence and commitment from the team. It builds credibility. These capabilities help the leader gain acceptance and handle pandemics which impact human life for several months and years. And nobody does these things, and nobody should these things only to take care of disasters or crisis situations. These must be part of a leadership DNA so that these things are seen as felt leadership when crisis strike us. There is therefore this importance of staying true. We can't say that life is more important than livelihood or that livelihood is more important than life. This has been one of the most telling examples of the balance and the dilemma which the society faces when struck with these kinds of emergencies. So it is important for leaders to be truthful about goals, strategies, actions, outcomes, and data whenever there is a crisis that is impacting the organization. So what is truthfulness? Truthfulness is anticipation, demonstrating early detection and early warning capability. That is anticipation, which is part of truthfulness. Agility, demonstrating early solution capability. Empathy, having not sympathy but empathy. Empathy means dealing with the situation and leading from the front, keeping yourself in the shoes of the other person who is suffering the impact. Ingenuity, creativity, and innovation to develop out of the box solutions in the face of adversity. The ability to make sanitizers from all chemical and quasi chemical operations, the ability to make masks from textile and apparel companies, ability to make portables from engineering and automobile firms. These are all ingenuity examples. Providing the experience of moving to a more secure platform of life and work, that is securing truthfulness. And rewiring, which is the most difficult part of demonstrating jargon in action and outcomes. We can say all of these things: anticipation, agility, empathy, ingenuity, securing, but we should rewire the organization through actual demonstration of these facets, these 5 facets, and that is rewiring. Therefore, staying true to the developing situation and being truthful about the leadership actions that are being taken, the results they are producing, and the course corrections that would be made is part of the entire truthfulness paradigm that will ensure that leaders are able to lead the society out of severe stress. Similarly, we should be open about balancing business efficiency with social security. If you look at an engineering industry which does construction related products, or a fast moving consumer goods industry, there is their value chain. For a metals industry, ores to materials to components to aggregates to end product is a value chain. For a fast moving consumer goods industry, the additional ingredients will be there, or different ingredients will be there, which will be converted into the end product, and they move through warehouses, transportation systems, wholesalers, retailers, and finally reach consumers. We need to have stocks in the pipeline. If India did not have a pipeline stock, when the truck transportation stopped, it would not have been possible for the Indian population to have been covered with supply of essential goods or day-to-day living goods. It was possible because the supply chain was adequately stocked. It is therefore important to accept inventory management based on safety stock modeling as an important redundancy building approach, so that crises are handled appropriately by any country, and more so for developing countries such as India, which is vast and well spread out and where there are several population inequities. It is a data and leadership challenge. We also must commit ourselves to continue investments for fundamental research. If you didn't have products that could be repurposed, whether from anti-malarial, antiviral, anti-hepatitis, immunomodulator, anti-inflammatory, lupus, and other veterinary drugs as well, we would not been able to meet COVID in certain situations with certain patients. This is especially relevant in pharma. We need to have always a bank of drug candidates which could be repurposed as and when required. That is number 1. Number 2, we should have continued faith and belief in fundamental discovery. Commercial acceptance of a product should not be the only litmus test for research or innovation. Potential improvement in quality of life, potential security for human lives, that also must be the litmus test for fundamental research in pharmaceutical organization. We should also understand that underlying part technologies can power new products. Without sensory technologies, we would not have been able to develop a new simple SpO2 pulse oximeter measurement devices in this situation. Similarly, we could have had better monitoring of social distancing and the impact of COVID in various communities through Bluetooth and other apps which are connected by Bluetooth. In emergencies, even phased out products can be very helpful with minor technology tweaks. Therefore, we should have always an abundant capability to revert back to old products so that they can be stepped up in terms of availability. And most importantly, leadership must be tech committed. I have also mentioned earlier that a good leader is one who understands technology and knows how to deploy technology fruitfully. A leader who thinks that technology is only for producing today's product and getting a few dollars or rupees, that leader would not be a very effective leader for the long term for the society. Only the CEO can take ownership for fundamental R&D given the uncertainty of outcomes and the huge investments that are required. The CEO must demonstrate his faith and belief in technology leadership by using technology along with strategy. If there is one discipline that will differentiate a great CEO, a visionary CEO from other CEO, it is the commitment to research and development. It is only fundamental R&D and applied technology that can help firms and nations be emergency ready by reviving and adopting continuous R&D. So this is Leadership Plus. Let's look at the mindset and behaviors from an actual case study example. This is an Indian plant of a global multinational which operated in a city of Andhra Pradesh. After several weeks of lockdown, they recommenced the production, and there was a poisonous gas leak in that chemical factory affecting several villages and causing mortality in certain human beings and lots of disturbance. So what were the causes for that unplanned restart after a 40-day lockdown? There was no safety audit that was performed prior to the decision, and personnel were not prepared for any emergency that was not assessed. Then there was a deficient protocol itself. Dangerous chemicals were handled in the dead of the night. Inhibitors were used based on a on-the-fly estimation. There was lack of technology. For an MNC-owned plant, technology used appeared to be at least 3 decades obsolete. Even methodologies such as basic water sprinkling and other emission handling systems seemed to be absent. There was no emergency preparedness at all. When you restart a chemical factory, it is very important that you have ambulances, sirens, and things like that at hand. The plant had no emergency preparedness plan at all. The management was not visible and there was no felt leadership. Despite the plant being near villages, the plant had no protocol to warn villages in advance and evacuate the communities in case there was any adverse development. And there was a failure of global and local leadership because the MNC did not have its procedures imprinted on the local company. Neither did the local company take the advice of the multinational corporation in terms of the standards and the procedures. Even if a location decision cannot be undone due to the efflux of time, leadership at least has the additional responsibility for the neighborhoods and therefore for safe running of operation. This case, which involved leakage of dangerous styrene gas from the tankers, is a clear indication that industrial disasters are entirely man-made. By having appropriate safety procedures and also having a safety culture as an institutionalized DNA of each and every person in an industrial organization, we can avoid these kinds of accidents. And these, of course, are based on reports, and probably there is a fair measure of truth in the reports as well. And from time to time, we get several instructive lessons from the accidents that happen. And every company which is not impacted by such accidents directly must be alive to the risks that could happen at any point of time. So one should be very much aware that industrial accidents, workplace accidents are caused by mindset issues, behavior issues, by lack of appropriate safety culture. We should always keep in mind the safety pyramid. One fatality means there have been 300,000 unsafe acts or unsafe conditions. The more we do a vigilant safety review on a day-to-day basis of whatever is happening on the shop floor or the workplace, the more we will be able to prevent serious accidents and even fatalities. That is the lesson that comes from leadership of industrial safety. So what are the leadership instincts in the face of pandemic virulence? Because that is something which we cannot predict or plan for. So we need to overcome instincts to be able to lead effectively. When you combine human instincts with management training and leadership wisdom, we can take correct actions. On the other hand, if we are vulnerable to human instincts And if you force ourselves through certain classical management methodologies, we may take wrong actions as well. So we have to understand what is instinctive and what is needed in a crisis. When the instinct of management training says that when you have uncertainty, please get more data. You wait for additional information before you take a decision. But when you are facing a crisis, you must act with urgency. As a manager, when you face a difficulty, you tend to downplay and calm the nerves, and you withhold the bad news, hoping that you will prepare the organization through other means to overcome that. But when you have a pandemic, there is no time to lose. You have to communicate fast and with transparency. You tend to double down to explain and justify actions in a normal instinctive management. But here you must take responsibility and focus on solving problems. And you must stay on the course with production or marketing when it is a normal issue. But when pandemics are involved, you must engage yourself in constant updating. So there is an article by Carisi and Edmondson in Harvard Business Review which tellingly summarizes what prevents leaders from responding to the crisis effectively and proactively. It also outlines what they would need to do in a crisis to be effective so that the crisis is resolved. What is the leadership model for effectively dealing with pandemics? The same authors suggest a 5-point model for leaders to effectively lead times, societies and nations in dealing with emergencies of uncertain nature and long-lasting volatility. Fundamentally, leadership in crisis has got 5 parameters. 1. You must act with urgency. The risk of delaying decision would only snowball the impact of a pandemic. In the face of a pandemic with an exponential growth potential, each additional day of delay contributes to an even greater devastation. You must communicate with transparency. See, communicating with transparency is the second arm of the crisis leadership model. In this, you have a double-edged sword. If you communicate far too much, you may be risking becoming unpopular with the employees, with the customers, with the vendors, or even citizens. At the same time, communication has to be there, and it also has to be open, objective, and terminal. So how to balance your communication message, that is very important for the leader. It must be a message of hope, because without hope there cannot be a resolve in the human mind, and without a resolve there cannot be a solution. So communicating with transparency and openness is the second pillar. The third one is engage in constant updating. When you have crisis of the pandemic proportion, developments vary on a day-to-day basis. You got to be clear. That's what the governments are doing. When they talk about these active cases, when they talk about the cases discharged, when they talk about the fatalities, and that too collecting information from the nook and corner of the country, it is engaging with people in terms of constant updating. The more the statistics are provided with transparency, the more the engagement of the governments and bodies is visible to the people, the greater will be the confidence level. That provides in people an ability to grasp the new situation and get led by the leaders as appropriate. One should also be responsive to feedback. It is not that all leader decisions, all governmental decisions, or all the organizational decisions would be perfect. Leaders must be open to feedback and see what works and what doesn't work. It is important to gain additional insights from the critical feedback that the leader may receive. There have been cases where whole communities were cordoned off initially in the name of containment, but leaders were open to the feedback and they understood that it is not necessary to brand the entire community as necessitating containment. Only that particular house which is impacted by COVID must be contained. So the number of containment zones in terms of the spread has been significantly reduced, and along with that the disease also was controlled, the virus was also controlled, the chain was broken. So being open to feedback is also one of the hallmarks of leadership in crisis situations. And most importantly, leadership must be personally leading. Empathy is the foundation of leadership role modeling that will be perceived as genuine in a pandemic situation, because the society at large is suffering. The leader must be empathetic to the needs of the society. If a leader has had the occasion to personally go through challenging times, empathy would get amplified even further. Leadership in an uncertain, fast-moving crisis situation means making oneself available to feel what it is like to be in another's shoes. That will provide the capability to lead with empathy. That is the leadership model which is required to deal with pandemics. Whenever you are beset with the crisis, sooner or later you will return to the normal. When you are beset with a pandemic of unprecedented proportions such as COVID-19, the normal will be new. And what is the new normal? No one can really predict at this point of time. But everybody agrees that even after the crisis is tackled, we all will face a new normal. Because we cannot predict what is the new normal, we should use science, technology and management in a prudential manner and in a collaborative manner so that we can sustain the progress we have made as a humanity in handling a pandemic of unprecedented proportions. That is the lesson we all have learned through the COVID crisis, and similar lessons we need to learn from every accident, every incident, every disaster we read about or we see in our lives. Because from everything we can learn lessons. Leadership can be strengthened, greater fortitude, greater resilience, greater proactiveness, greater agility can be brought into our leadership personality to be able to handle crisis situations. So I would end this saying that we need humane leadership in crisis. Leadership to overcome crisis cannot happen overnight. It must be a leadership personality that is developed over several years and which can display itself when crises are faced. It requires robust leadership capabilities that are embedded in the leader over time. In addition, certain leadership qualities that lead by example become very important. What are these reinforcing factors? As we discussed in the previous slides, empathy. To be able to be in others' shoes, suffer along with the society while leading the society out of the suffering. That is extremely important. Inclusivity, taking everyone along, irrespective of the affiliations, in the movement to overcome the crisis. That is extremely important. Agility in grasping the problem and studying the problem and also developing a solution. Clarity of thought, that is, I am executing this path. However, if the path is not providing the appropriate results, I will have the clarity and openness to change the path or take additional feedback, come up with more creative solution. And most importantly, positivity. You should never lose hope, because hope is the bulwark of resolve, and resolve is the bulwark of strength to solve a problem. So leadership response to crisis has to keep the human and social aspects on the top. The economic aspects cannot be ignored, but the impact of economic aspects on the human and social aspects merit deep attention. The ability to save and protect both lives and livelihoods calls upon the best of leadership ability in a leader when faced with disasters which are either man-made or natural, and in handling pandemics which cannot be predicted and which could pose unprecedented risks to the humanity. That's human leadership and humane leadership in crisis. It is important that leadership absorbs all of these insights from things that happen all around us and which have characterized 2020 as a year of discontinuity in terms of all these factors. It has taught everyone a lesson, and there are more lessons for leadership than for any other domain in this crisis that has happened. And by virtue of leaders' ability to use all the factors of production, as we said, science and technology, natural resources, etc., leader has got higher responsibility, probably the highest responsibility, to ensure that he or she stays in control of the response measures to contain the crisis and move the society to safe landing. Thank you.